Good morning. I'm going to share a little bit of some research that we did recently. I direct a research center at IMD, and we work a lot with Cisco, so this work I'm going to share with you we did with Cisco. But we also collaborated with two other organizations for this work. One is the World Web Forum, and the other one is the HR consultancy Meta Baritone. And I'm just going to go back here, and the title of the research is Redefining Leadership for a Digital World. And the source of the inspiration for this work came from earlier work that we did on companies and industries. And we looked at industries and how they're being affected by digital disruption. And we mapped these industries on what we call the digital vortex. And if you're in one of the red industries there toward the middle of the vortex where you really feel the heat, you probably are experiencing the effects of digital disruption. But even if you're toward the outside, you can quite easily and quickly be pulled into the middle, as we see these days in manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and other industries. But as we did this work, it struck us that everything we've been talking about is at the organizational level, processes and strategies and so forth. But what does it mean for individual leaders, leaders like you? And we've done a vast amount of work on leadership over the years, but is there a difference now about leading in an environment that's undergoing digital disruption? Of course, we see a lot of headlines to suggest that the stresses on you as leaders are increasing in the digital age. Now, just like Jeff before, I also did a little bit of research on leadership, but I did it in a much more simple way. I just did a Google search on leadership, and it turns out there's 550 million pages on that topic. And I didn't actually notice this before, but you can search on books. So I searched on books to see how many books were written about leadership, and it turns out there's slightly more than 3 million. So the bar is quite high to come up with new insights around leadership. So in any case, we went ahead with the research, and we surveyed more than 1,000 executives across the world, and we conducted a couple of dozen interviews with leaders in digitally disruptive environments. And a lot of the results were what we expected. So leaders need to be good communicators, they need to be decisive, they need to be inspiring, and so forth. But there were a few things that we found, a few attributes that were surprising to us, that were slightly different than what the traditional leader is like. So I want to talk quickly about these, and then I want to invite a digital leader on stage with me. The first attribute is humility. In fact, that leaders in these very disruptive environments understand that they don't know very much, and that there's lots of other people who know a lot more than they do. So they're very willing and eager to ask questions. I had an experience a couple of weeks ago at IMD. We had a top team for 3 days, and the person asking the most questions, in fact, was the CEO in that particular case. And then last week, there was another program, and the CEO refused to come because he was so nervous, because he doesn't know the answers around digital. So humility was one of the things we noticed that differentiated successful leaders in these environments from less successful ones. The second one is adaptability. You know, traditionally, leaders, you know, they stick with their guns. You know, they make a decision and they follow it through. Whereas in very fast-changing environments, this ethos is being challenged. And we heard from many leaders a version of this quote, which is, "Changing my mind is a strength, not a weakness." Because as situations change, as facts change, it's okay to change your mind as long as it's based on the new facts. And the third one was visionary, being visionary. We noticed that these leaders tended to waver quite a lot in the short term. You know, the plans changed, short-term strategies changed, but they had very clear visions about where they wanted to go or where they wanted to take their organizations in the future. Probably the most dramatic example of that today is with General Electric, which is moving into a direction of leading in the industrial internet. Even though they're not exactly sure how they're going to get there, the vision is extremely clear. And the final one is that these leaders are engaged. So they're great listeners. They're always out there talking to customers, talking to employees, other stakeholders, trying to figure out what is going on. So these are the four attributes. And so we call them agile leaders. That's the term we have for them. And you can see the difference between agile and non-agile leaders is quite, according to our data, quite dramatic across a certain number of aspects. They're much more open to challenging their assumptions. They're much more open to getting opinions from their teams, much more open to being coached on new digital trends than non-agile leaders. We also noticed that they were much more interested in new technologies and new business models, and they're more likely to look at disruptive solutions. So these are some of the differences we saw between agile and non-agile leaders. And so the final slide I want to show you is this, where we put it all together. And these attributes of these agile leaders manifest themselves in certain behaviors. And the three that we see as most relevant, the first one is something we call hyper-awareness, which is different than just awareness. That these leaders are interested in not just their immediate ecosystems, but they spend a lot of time and energy trying to understand what's going on around the corners, outside of their normal sphere. And then what do they do with that information? They make informed decisions. So yes, to some respect, they're trusting their intuition, their guts, but they're much more likely to look at the data. And then finally, they act quickly. And this was something that came through very strongly in the research. They're more willing to go with a 75% solution in 1 week than a 95% solution in 1 month. So this was, in summary, in short summary, what we discovered. So what I'd like to do now is to invite a digital leader to join me on the stage. This is Kevin Bandy, who is the Chief Digital Officer of Cisco. So Kevin reports to the CEO. He's part of the management team. Before he joined Cisco, Kevin was the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Transformation at Salesforce. And then before that, he started the software as a service and cloud practices for Accenture. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Bandy to the stage.
How you doing, Mike? Good to see you, buddy.
So, Kevin, one of the first things that Chuck Robbins did when he became CEO of Cisco 18 months ago was establish the role of the Chief Digital Officer, and that's you.
Yep.
Could you explain a little bit about what that role entails?
So, you know, first and foremost, when Chuck came in, he was replacing John Chambers, who had spoken for the Valley for 25 years. And Chuck asked two fundamental questions: where's technology going? And then what are the implications to business? And those were not subtle questions, those were material questions, because what Chuck was really asking is Cisco going to own where the market is going, or are they going to play in where the market's going? Chuck does not like to play in something. Chuck wants to own where the market's going. So my responsibility was unique to Cisco because it cuts across every one of the executive leadership functions to transform a company that is #1 in the market. 80% of the world's network traffic crosses Cisco. And he said, you have unfettered access to go change anything and everything for how Cisco is going to own that market.
So I imagine there's some challenges that you're facing in doing that, trying to change a large, well-functioning organization. Could you talk about some of those challenges and how you're looking to overcome them?
Well, I think the biggest principle, when you're #1 or #2 in every single market and you tell people you're going to change, their first question is why? And the biggest principle that we started with the leadership team, if you're going to own the future of the market, if you're following business as usual rules today, you're fundamentally going to be out of business very, very soon. And I think in today's world, with operating models changing so rapidly, you find a lot of people trying to come to parity, saying, I want to mimic other leading practices of other companies. And every time they do that, you find that they begin to falter very, very quickly because they don't have a strategy. So for us, to educate people that we're going to break every business as usual model, and all the way down to the policy levels to really redefine Cisco away from a hardware company more towards a software company, that implied fundamental change to every single person within Cisco.
Now, many people here in the room are part of organizations that are undergoing, to some extent, a digital transformation today, and quite a few of you are probably leading that transformation. Do you have any advice for those folks?
I thought you were going to ask them if they wanted to give me advice. That was going to be fun. You know, I think one of the things that a lot of companies don't do is, and you talked about it to an extent, I think historically companies have done this notion of actionable insights. They look at analytics and they roll it up and they create a report and they say, okay, this gives me something. The one thing that we've done entirely is we've altered the metrics by which we're running Cisco. In 15 months, we've altered the entirety of how we look at the P&L structure of Cisco. And the implications of that moves towards actionable accountability, which means we're trying to pivot our operating model every 18 to 24 months. Historically, you know this very well from talking to leaders, you get people that are very steadfast in what they know and how they want to run things. And what we as a leadership team have said is that we're going to control our own disruption, and every 24 months we will be running a different business. And that means from how we go to market, and when you think about it, Mike, we have 72,000 employees, but we have 280,000 channel representatives, and we're changing every single one of their roles. So cross-functional, and we are not incremental at all. We are pushing the boundaries. For every 24 months, we want a new business model.
Yeah, and do you find you are encountering some resistance internally and externally to that?
I think internally, there is a fundamental fallacy that people think that they want to change the sales model first and foremost. And the implication of that would be catastrophic because people cannot change if the fundamental principles by how they execute their jobs on a day-to-day basis don't change. So the biggest things that we've focused on first and foremost is we think about it very simply. I implemented this very simple slide that said, Cisco historically changed their portfolio, and that's how they would define the market. And I said, we will change the business model before our portfolio comes to market in a different capacity. Otherwise, we'd be releasing hardware through a software-oriented model. And so we have altered our engineering and our new product introduction model in parallel with our operating model. And last, we will alter our entire sales model because otherwise we're not going to market efficiently. And I find a lot of companies focus first and foremost on, I'm going to create new digital offers, and then I'm going to change my sales model, which is fundamentally backwards to how you lead through a transformation.
I just talked about some research that we've done around leadership in digitally disruptive environments. How do you see your role as a leader in a company that's undergoing in process of a transformation today? What's your leadership style?
You said make a decision on 75%. Sometimes I'm probably somewhere around 15% and I'm moving. And the reason why I'm probably a little more aggressive in that is because if you think about it on a scale of 1 to 100, I can execute 15, 15, 15. And that iterative nature, I am very adaptive and learning very, very quickly. And I'm a big believer that in order to execute transformation, you have to create practitioners across the organization, because if you're telling them when and how to change, they don't change. But if I am executing cross-functional practitioners and they're participating in developing this new operating model, then they're the voice into the organization. I don't have to force them to be the voice. They're actually owning that. But I do think that what you talked about there with hyper-awareness and your digital vortex analysis is accurate. For the very first time on a global basis, Cisco is seeing every single industry having a very unique networking strategy, and that's never happened before. It varies by every single industry.
The CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt, has gone public saying that the digital transformation is going to be the most significant challenge for leaders in their careers at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I think that I think not only does the CIO have to learn a new technical architecture, the CEO, the COO, and the CFO have to fundamentally understand that technology is the foundation of any business strategy today. And as a result of that, they cannot just push this over to the CIO or the infrastructure organization and say, go figure it out. Does not exist that way anymore. If you look in the Valley, you've visited us a few times, but last year in the Valley, there was $50 billion invested through venture capitalists. So just as Fabian started off, yes, the Valley moves very, very quickly. Artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning are the two biggest investments in the Valley. And when you look at that, the implications upon every single industry, it's only going to get faster. And what Cisco is developing right now are self-learning networks. So we're embedding all of that workflow, the process analytics, the automation, and the security directly in the analytics. So they're going to be learning constantly in this digital-ready architecture. And that's a material change on how people are looking to run their businesses.
And who do you see as Cisco's main competitors going forward?
I'm going to start with some of your last question. If people don't fundamentally begin to look at the technology driving their business models, they will be obsolete. If they don't challenge how they're running their network infrastructure to begin to automate more of it, to embed and look at the influence of artificial intelligence to migrate their competencies of their employees, they will be obsolete. What I see as operating models, it's not only because we're doing it, but we do see operating models changing every 18 to 24 months. So internally, I think status quo is a big challenge. I think that, I think you're going to see considerable consolidation across the IT industry. But as a result of that, you're also going to see considerable partnership opportunities with big IT companies that weren't traditional partners coming together. So I think it's not so much a competition perspective, Mike. I think there's more of how the market reflects on who it's turning to alter in this digital economy is going to be unique.
Mm-hmm. And any last comments or advice that you would give the group here today?
There's a simple slide that I go back to internally that I think a lot of people oftentimes, when they get into a digital conversation, it talks about automation, automation, automation. And the one thing that I've implemented heavily across Cisco is if you don't first simplify the business architecture, if you don't rewrite the rules, which you talked a little bit about, be hyper aware of the fact that the market is changing and simplify against the strategy of where you're going. If you don't simplify first before you automate, all you do is institutionalize your existing business processes, which becomes a fundamental impediment to how you're going to evolve your business. So we went through and we began to simplify every single thing about moving Cisco away from just a traditional hardware company to where it's going to become one of a platform economics, which is, think about traditional networking being consumed. And the reason why you think about consumed is because in today's digital economy, what your own research identifies is customers are going to have more and more choice of how they actually consume. So I'm simplifying every business process before we automate it, and we're embedding constant metrics into it, so where our engineering, our sales performance, and the financial performance of the company will have one unified metric, so that we're, in your words, hyper aware. We're constantly evolving on the one common insight, common analytics. Don't just measure, but actually challenge the business as usual, set different metrics, and don't be incremental. I find a lot of people's digital transformation strategies are very, very incremental versus challenging the business.
Kevin, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Appreciate you having me.